and then we should unleash the horses, and then, eventually...
That worked out brilliantly
Doesn't
last
that?
time.
It usually works so well.
The Titirangi Or Animal Zoo, and then $5 donation fee for all the toddlers.
Oh.
Greg Preslin, thank you very much, Deputy Chair of the Waitakere Rangers local board there. A huge response to your number one. Let's have a look. Norm Kirk says someone, Michael Joseph Savage. You've got Julius Vogel, Peter Fraser, hands down. You've got, again, Jacinda Ardern, more Michael Joseph Savage, a lot of Michael Joseph Savage. You've got David Longy for Enable Nuclear Free New Zealand. You've got Keith Holyoake. You've got, huge amount there. But it seems to be that most of you say Michael Joseph Savage.
Well, I've already texted. And yes, it is Michael Joseph Savage.
That's strange. Anyway, Good to have you on. Michael, Joe, thank you very much. I'm Carol, kia ora, and see you next week.
Kia ora.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, a responsibility to reproduce or a right to live without pain. Young women say they're being denied hysterectomies to treat chronic endometriosis by doctors who assume they'll want children. So how much autonomy should women have over their own bodies in 2021? The rough sleepers being trespassed in Whangarei, an early vote of no confidence in an overdue report into Oranga Tamariki, a call for fully vaccinated travellers to be allowed to isolate at home like air crews, and the recruitment bloodbath, international poachers offering triple the going rate, and the hope of faster access to the COVID vaccination. And a joyful note too, you want to hear this one?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. Young women say they're being denied hysterectomies by doctors who are prioritising fertility over the treatment of chronic endometriosis. 1 in 10 women suffer from the condition, which causes painful cramps and excessive bleeding during periods. For the most severe cases, removing the uterus is the last treatment option. But 19-year-old Azaria Howell has consistently been denied the surgery because of her age.
I've been told a lot of times by usually male GPs that in order to get a hysterectomy, you have to be at least 35, you have to have 2 children, you have to have a husband, and all of these just strange medical loopholes that really make no sense to me.
And you can hear more on this shortly on Checkpoint. The Oceans and Fisheries Minister says the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the reliance of deep-sea fishing on foreign workers. Hundreds of workers, many of them from Russia or Ukraine, have been recruited in the last year to crew on trawlers. A ministerial inquiry has been announced today into the use of such migrant labour in New Zealand's seafood sector. David Parker says the industry needs to move away from its reliance on foreign crew.
Some boats, you really need to speak Russian and understand the Cyrillic alphabet in order to do the work. So you're never going to get New Zealanders into that part of the workforce if that's the status quo. Having said that, it's very hard for the industry to transition out of where they've got to, and so we want to see what we can do to give them a hand.
The inquiry covers commercial seafood activities, deep-sea and inshore fishing, aquaculture activities and seafood processing. A report from the Office of the Children's Commissioner has revealed self-harm, bullying and inappropriate use of force by staff at an Oranga Tamariki care and protection residence in Lower Hutt. This follows the announcement yesterday that a Christchurch facility is closing following revelations of staff manhandling children. The Commissioner, Judge Andrew Beecroft, says that these are not isolated incidents, with similar reports written on residents across the country.
We are very worried about ipuni. Children themselves recount feeling unsafe from other children and bullying, unsafe from themselves, and we know about, sadly, self-harm and suicide risks.
Judge Beecroft says phased closure of care and protection residences has been on the books for the last 6 or 7 years. The government has announced the date of the first Matariki public holiday. Today is the first day of the Māori Lunar New Year, when the 9 stars of Matariki are visible in the northeastern sky. It will be a public holiday from 2022 and will be marked on June the 24th next year. The dates for the next 30 years have also been set and will always fall on a Friday, sometime between mid-June and early July. The Workplace Relations Minister Michael Wood says it's important that the nation finally has a holiday embedded in Te Ao Māori. Canada's national holiday has been marked by protests and scaled-back celebrations following the recent discovery of hundreds of unmarked graves at former schools for Indigenous children. In the capital, Ottawa, thousands of people joined a Cancel Canada Day rally, chanting "No Pride in Genocide." In his message, the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said it was right to reflect on Canada's historical failures and the injustices that still exist for Indigenous people. Rough sleepers are being trespassed from a council park in Whangārei, despite growing alarm about homelessness in Te Tai Tokiro. This week, RNZ revealed new figures showing Whangarei's homeless population has increased from 21 people to 293 in just 2 years. On Wednesday, 2 homeless people illegally living in a park were trespassed by the Whangarei District Council with the notice warning they could be fined or imprisoned. But the pair say they have nowhere else to go. The council says they have not taken up offers for a legal place to live. It's 4 minutes past 5. The Black Caps intend taking the mace, the symbol of Test cricket supremacy, on a tour of Aotearoa when they get out of quarantine. The bulk of the Black Cap squad is currently in MIQ in Auckland, having returned from England after their Test Championship final win over India. Coach Gary Stead says the side's been overwhelmed by the feedback and public support they have had following their success.
I guess the thing I get most out of this is seeing the joy on Kiwis' faces, and my understanding is that we'll be looking at trying to take the mace around the country at some stage. I think the first priority, though, is probably get the players home, see their families, and then we'll look at, I guess, sharing the joy that we've had with I guess, earning that mace with the rest of the country as well.
The Black Ferns Sevens aren't using their silver medal performance from the last Olympics as an incentive to go one better in Tokyo later this month. New Zealand has dominated the women's game since Rio, and as such, a hugely experienced team has been selected. Co-coach Corey Sweeney says while there may have been some individual motivation for those 7 players in the squad that fell 1 win short of gold in Rio, it's not something the team is thinking about.
Certainly as a team, this is a new group of players with a new vision, a new direction, and our focus is about leaving mana, and certainly it's not something that we reflect on Rio. It's about looking forward and making sure that we perform the best that we can to our potential in Tokyo.
The All Black Sevens have also named an experienced lineup led by Tim Mickelson, Scott Curry and Sam Dickinson. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, writer and activist Rebecca Solnit recollects her non-existence. Jessica Bruder, who took to the road to research her book Nomadland, and Dr. Gary Fetka, who's the surgeon who spotted Billy Connolly's Parkinson's disease. He's also got some very firm views on what we should eat. Ko Kim Hillaho, join me on Saturday morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow in the west from Northland to Wellington, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Generally fine, areas of morning frost or fog, a few showers about eastern Northland and northern Coromandel. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa cloudy periods, the odd shower about northern Hawke's Bay and Gisborne. Mainly fine elsewhere with a few cloudy areas. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, Otago and Southland included, fine and frosty. Patches of low cloud or fog morning and night. Bulla and Westland mostly fine, some areas of cloud. Fiordland mostly cloudy, patchy drizzle about the coast. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Kia ora rā, Susanna. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. You have a responsibility to reproduce. That's what one young woman's surgeon told her when she asked for a hysterectomy to treat chronic endometriosis. The surgery removes the uterus to help with painful bleeding caused by the condition during a woman's period. But women under 35 are routinely denied it because the medical system assumes they will want to have children. Louise Tanuth reports.
3 years ago, Grace Hall was diagnosed with endometriosis, a disorder where tissue that normally lines the uterus grows outside it. It affects 1 in 10 women, causing painful cramps and excessive bleeding during periods. Treatments range from painkillers, hormone therapy, surgery to remove the tissue, or for the most extreme cases, a hysterectomy. That's what Grace's gynaecologist suggested as she was suffering from chronic pain. At 27, it wasn't a decision she made lightly. She got clearance from a psychologist, but her surgeon pushed back.
He had received the letter from the clinical psychologist, and he still tried to deny it, and was just very determined that, I know as a woman I have this, ability, responsibility to kind of reproduce.
After reluctantly agreeing to the surgery, he said something that stuck with her to this day.
But he said that he would cry for me on the operating table, kind of made me feel really guilty about the whole thing. When I left, his personal assistant told me that I should be really grateful that he said yes, because if I'd gone anywhere else, the answer would have been a no.
Despite getting the help she wanted, those words left her in a fragile mental state.
It made me feel kind of guilty and as if I was reduced to just the fact that I have a uterus, and I felt like I have this responsibility to produce children. And it just took away from everything else that I have to offer as a person and what I wanted to achieve with my life.
She had health insurance, which sped up the process, but 19-year-old Azaria Howell doesn't. She also has endometriosis and had surgery to remove it 2 years ago. But it's grown back, and every day is a struggle.
So I do still deal with a lot of the impacts to this day. I mean, I've just been in hospital for cysts, dealing with a lot of day-to-day just chronic pain, a lot of fatigue, and a lot of mental health impacts as well.
She wants a hysterectomy, but multiple doctors have told her she's too young.
I've been told a lot of times by usually male GPs that in order to get a hysterectomy, you have to be at least 35, you have to have 2 children, you have to have a husband, and all of these just strange medical loopholes that really make no sense to me. It just doesn't really seem very fair to people living with these chronic conditions.
That's a theme gynaecologist and obstetrician Helen Patterson says is widespread across the medical system. Young women are also not the priority.
So there is a limited amount of surgical access and funding within public care. It differentiates across different DHBs. The reality is there is a prioritisation system for choosing who gets the surgery that is available in those areas, with cancer being the priority.
She's urging medical professionals to rethink the way they treat younger female patients.
Let's take the focus off the fertility aspect of things and let's actually focus on the person and look after the person. One of the problems is if we, bring in the paternalism of we think that you don't know what you want and so therefore we're trying to stop you from having something because of the potential you'll want children in the future, we miss the point of actually looking after the person.
And removing the uterus doesn't stop someone being able to have children.
If you keep your ovaries, then you can actually have surrogacy with, your egg and sperm, retrieve your egg, do IVF, and then have a surrogate.
For Grace and Azaria, they're hoping things will change so that other females don't have to go through the same struggles.
Homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback on that one. Nō reira anei nā kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. Should young women who are in pain have the right to choose to have hysterectomies? Are doctors right to prioritise their fertility? After 6, we'll speak to a GP and women's health advocate on the autonomy women have over their bodies in 2021. A vote of no confidence in a report into Oranga Tamariki that's yet to be delivered to the Minister. Checkpoint has spoken to a state care survivor and a Waitangi claimant who say revelations of alleged abuse at an OT youth facility in Christchurch show the agency, the Minister and his advisory board are oblivious to what's going on in their own backyard. The board that's making recommendations on the future of Oranga Tamariki has delayed its report for 2 weeks because of sickness. Aaron Smale, who
whakapapas to Ngāti Porou is one of the claimants named in the Waitangi Tribunal's inquiry into Oranga Tamariki, and he's also completing his PhD on the Māori Tamariki in state care. He says Calvin Davis and his advisors have failed to consult with the right people, including survivors and those with lived experience, and he can't fathom why they're not aware of what's actually happening inside OT's youth facilities.
I've heard about those kinds of stories for the last probably 18 months, 2 years, so it wasn't a surprise to me at all. I mean, I hear a lot of stories about what's going on in Oranga Tamariki. There's so many that I can't actually keep up. I mean, there's too many to actually follow up on most of the time because I've got so much else on that I'm doing. But no, I'm not at all surprised. I note, though, that Calvin Davis and Whitta Gardner looked very surprised, which is kind of ironic, given they're supposed to be doing this big investigation and overhaul. They don't seem to know that this kind of thing's still going on. They've had an advisory panel that's supposedly looking into that and was going to report back by the end of June. I think that report's been delayed because they now look stupid because they haven't picked it up.
So, with all this information, is anyone talking to you? Because as a claimant with the Waitangi Tribunal's ruling on Oranga Tamariki, it was advised that they speak to people like you and they specifically named you. So what conversations have you had with the Minister Calvin Davis, and what about that advisory group?
We managed to get, a couple of us managed to get a place at the table after a little bit of pushing with the governance group, which is a bunch of senior Māori leaders who've expressed concern about Oranga Tamariki, but we had to really push to get to be part of that meeting. And it was really just a chit-chat. There was no substance to the meeting at all. And the advisory panel has, well, it certainly hasn't spoken to me, and I'm not sure that it's spoken to many of the other claimants. They briefly, Matt Tukaki briefly turned up at a meeting of the claimants about a month ago. But apart from that, the contact has been minimal. And, you know, it's quite clear in the tribunal's report that they said to the Crown, you need to talk to the claimants. Some of these claimants, including myself, we filed our claims on various issues relating to child welfare. In some cases years ago, mine I think was over 10 years ago. And yet, you know, now we have been heard at the tribunal, and the tribunal said to the Crown, you need to step back in the first instance and you need to listen to the claimants.
So why wouldn't the Minister talk to you then, Aaron? What do you think is going on here?
Well, he's talked. I mean, he was polite, and it was all very, polite and collegial. But in terms of actually discussing the nitty-gritty, I mean, there's other claimants I know who, I mean, my claim was about adoption. So that's one issue on the table in terms of the claimants. There's other claimants that have been through the welfare system. A survivor I know very well, Tyrone Marks, he went through all of the welfare homes virtually and Lake Alice. And yet he has had no contact from the Minister. He was giving evidence about Lake Alice a couple of weeks ago. And, yeah, there's been apologies from the police, for example, at the Royal Commission about their failure to investigate Lake Alice properly. Now, the failure there is that they failed to listen to survivors. They were failing to listen to them when they were children. They have not listened to them as adults. And now they are not listening to them again. And so the Minister's charging off on his merry way, telling everybody he's going to fix the problem. He doesn't even know what the problem is.
What confidence do you have then in the report that this advisory board is putting together? Because the Minister has told this program that he's expecting it in the next while and should make an announcement about it around August from memory. So what confidence do you have in that report and what will follow?
I've got absolutely no confidence. I've got a letter up on my screen saying that report was coming back by the end of June. Now, they've made the excuse that, somebody's ill and they can't get it finished by the end of June. What's happened here is that this video that's been leaked has completely blown them out of the water because they've supposedly done this investigation of what's going on and what's wrong with the ministry, and they haven't picked this up. That's my guess. The minister's kind of hand-picking and picking off individuals here, there and everywhere just to sort of make it look like he's consulting, but he's not.
What is your message to him, Aaron?
You can't solve a problem until you know what the problem is. He doesn't know what the problem is. People who've been through the system, they know what the problem is. They've had to live with it their whole lives. They continue to live with it. The Crown continues to ignore them, and yet he thinks he can charge off and fix the problem. He doesn't even know what it is. He doesn't even know what's going on in his own ministry. Until he starts to listen to people who do know what happens when you're cut off from your family, when you're put into a system that abuses you, he's not going to get anywhere. He's just going to be another minister who fails to listen to people. He'll just join a long queue of people over the last 50, 60 years who haven't listened to the people that are actually being affected by this. It's all very well having a whole lot of senior Māori leaders. Where were they? You know, I've had gang members say to me, where were iwi leaders when I was in Kohitere and getting bashed up and abused? I've had that numerous times. Survivors say to me, where were these people? They turn up when there's a media spotlight on. This has been going on for a long time. This hasn't just suddenly happened and dropped out of the sky in the last 2 years. It's been going on for decades.
And that was Aaron Smale. Now, Calvin Davis, we have a statement from the Minister saying the Advisory Board has consulted widely across New Zealand, and both Oranga Tamariki, the Board and myself have met with Mr Smale. I would encourage anyone to wait until they've read the Board's final report and my decision around the future direction of Oranga Tamariki before questioning their legitimacy. And Matthew Tukaki, who chairs the Ministerial Advisory Board for Oranga Tamariki, says in a statement that they've held more than 70 hui and engagements across the nation in the last 13 weeks. Included in that was a meeting with the claimant group, and the board handed over their boardroom for the group to also hui amongst themselves. In addition, he says the board has met with a number of the lead claimants as individuals and representing other groups. As well, board members are in direct contact with many of those lead claimants and have also provided some of their leadership group with updates along the way as recently as the last fortnight. And he says they've also engaged with a number of whānau who are currently in the system as it stands today, and they have built a process to both refer and monitor those cases. And Matthew Tukaki says he'd urge everyone to pause and allow us to get on with the job we have been tasked to do. His primary concern and that of the board is our children, whānau, involved in the system now, and to do all we can to improve their future while at the same time reduce the number of children coming into the system. It is 20 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rā watu, mō te whakarongo mai e haere nei. We'll go to Fiji now, where the medical authorities are defending not putting the country into a full lockdown as case numbers continue to soar. They say it's in line with international practice and takes into account humanitarian considerations. It comes as a record 431 cases and 2 more deaths were confirmed by the Health Ministry. RNZ Pacific's Christine Ravoy reports.
The number of active cases of COVID-19 in Fiji is climbing towards 4,000, with more than 1,000 of them seeing out their isolation at home. The Health Ministry announced this week that isolation facilities will now be dedicated to patients most at risk of becoming severely ill or dying from the virus. Our correspondent in Suva, Lithe Movono, says it comes as the government prepares for more cases and deaths.
They're planning to turn an area that we call Sport City, which is in Lautala Bay, just 5 minutes outside of the city centre. They're making that entire sporting arena a set of COVID care facilities. So they're trying to move people out of Colonial War Memorial Hospital, our main hospital, and look after them there.
University of Otago epidemiologist Professor Michael Baker says it's evident Fijian authorities are really beyond their limits.
There's huge danger in sending home people who actually have this infection because many of them will be going back to multi-generational households that may be fairly crowded, and it'll be very hard for them to avoid infecting household members and really propagating this outbreak even further.
Christchurch anaesthetist Dr. Wayne Morris is in Fiji with the Australian Medical Assistance Team to help with the COVID-19 response. He says health authorities are doing their best in trying circumstances.
It's been a really sophisticated response by the Fijian health authorities, but I think that this sort of outbreak would stress any health system. So we're obviously very worried about the increasing numbers of cases, and it's fair to say that it is really stressing the system.
This outbreak has led to more than 4,800 cases and 22 deaths to date. But despite the rising number, rules are being broken. Health Secretary James Fong berated a group of people for attending a birthday party, which resulted in several cases.
Any large gathering of family may be the last time you see your grandparents because they could easily become infected by this highly transmissible variant. Don't forget, it's not only you and your family that will suffer these consequences. The entire community must now go under strict containment protocols.
Despite the alarming figures, Lide Movono says the government maintains there is no need for a national lockdown.
And the reason the government has given is that basically we can't afford it. Most of the clusters are coming out of socio-economically challenged communities, the government is saying. So these would be informal settlements. And they're saying that if we do have a lockdown, that it would be these people that would be affected the most.
But Biman Prasad of the opposition National Federation Party warns the government's COVID mitigation plan is leading the country to disaster.
What we've been saying is learn from New Zealand. I mean, you know, Christine, what happened in New Zealand, what kind of lockdowns they have different levels, and what does a lockdown mean? You know, it doesn't mean that people get locked into the house and do not have access to food or whatever. They're allowed to do that. But a lockdown is a strategy to arrest the spread of the virus and bring it down to zero while you continue to vaccinate the people.
Following advice from the medical assistance team from New Zealand and Australia, Dr. James Fong says the Health Ministry will increase its protection of government teams working on community screening or at field hospitals. He says this is crucial because there are thousands of frontline workers caring for the mild and severe COVID patients in Fiji.
Meanwhile, Australia will halve the number of overseas arrivals on commercial flights as its managed isolation system cracks under pressure from the highly transmissible Delta variant. Alice Stewart reports.
The new travel restrictions come as the country fights outbreaks simultaneously across 3 state capitals, seeing almost half of all Australians in lockdown. Speaking fresh from his own quarantine after the G7 summit in the UK, Prime Minister Scott Morrison today announced a 4-phase plan to reopen Australia after lockdowns triggered by the current outbreaks. He said by July 14th, international arrivals would be capped at 3,000 overseas travellers per week, although individual states would have the option of moving sooner.
The Commonwealth will facilitate increased commercial flights to increase international repatriations during this period of reduced caps at the commercial caps at the major airports. So where we will lose some capacity for inbound flights, the Commonwealth will directly seek to mitigate that by upping those commercially facilitated flights.
Mr Morrison said those brought home by the government on repatriation flights would be quarantined at the Howard Springs quarantine facility, easing pressure on managed isolation facilities in major cities. It comes as New South Wales reported its biggest daily rise in cases during the latest outbreak and for 2021. 31 new cases were recorded today, bringing total infections in the state to more than 200 since the first case was detected more than 2 weeks ago. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian today reminded residents they would be staying home for at least another week.
So we're anticipating that there could be an increase in numbers over the next few days, and then hopefully early next week we should see the impacts of the lockdown really turning and having a positive impact.
Meanwhile, Australia is also looking at a pilot scheme to trial home quarantine. It would be put to the test in the state of Victoria first and be only for fully vaccinated arrivals quarantining for less than 14 days. Lockdown rules are easing in parts of Queensland, but Brisbane's lockdown will continue after 3 new cases of the Delta variant were reported today. Our Cabinet will make a decision on whether to continue the pause on the Trans-Tasman bubble on Monday.
Time to ditch the one-size-fits-all managed isolation and quarantine for people who are fully vaccinated, according to a professor of medicine. This week, Checkpoint's spoken to businesses unable to send vaccinated staff overseas to critical trade shows because of a lack of space in MIQ on their return. And the ASB Tennis Classic also faltered this week, again because of difficulties getting MIQ spots. So far, about 9% of New Zealanders are fully vaccinated, with a number of regions exceeding their targets. Targets that Auckland University Professor of Medicine Des Gorman questions.
I think it's a time-honoured tradition of setting incredibly low targets, exceeding them, then congratulating yourself on how well you've done. I think when you look at our performance against the rest of the world, there's a good reason why we're ranked 122nd. So, I mean, I think what you've just described to me says everything about the targets and nothing about anything else.
Do you think they've been aiming low?
I don't think it'd be possible to aim much lower. I think the targets have been dictated to by the amount of vaccine that's available and the very limited ability to get it into people's arms. So I think it's actually working backwards from what they think they can achieve easily and then setting that as a target. Well, that's not a target. A target is something which stretches you to do better today than you did yesterday and do better next week than you did last week. A target which you can trip over and succeed against is not really a target.
Checkpoint's been talking to businesses this week, and a number of them who would like to leave the country on short trips to do business and return. They can't do it because they can't get into MIQ. They're fully vaccinated. Another issue, the ASB Classic cancelled because of lack of spots in MIQ. What does the science tell us about whether we can loosen up those requirements for fully vaccinated people?
Well, we already have a living example in New Zealand, Lisa, in terms of aircrew who come back into the country who are fully vaccinated. They've been isolating for a couple of days while they're away, and they are quarantining or isolating at home. We already are doing it. We're doing it on a fairly large scale in terms of the aircrew, and there has not been a single outbreak resulting from that particular approach. So quite frankly, if you and I were vaccinated with a vaccine like Pfizer and we spent a couple of days before we came back to New Zealand in isolation, we maybe had a rapid antigen test at the airport, we should be able to isolate at home, you and I, for a couple of days, and then away we go. There's no reason why we'd need to be in quarantine given that sort of approach.
When you say isolate at home for a couple of days, what do you mean? A week or less?
No, I mean 3 days at home. And basically you'd go home for 3 days. You'd have to have your phone on. People would check you are where you claim to be. You'd be pinged at home. People may ring you to prove that you are actually isolating at home. You're not roaming around the neighbourhood. But if you think about it, what the prerequisites for that sort of liberty are, that you've been vaccinated, that you're isolated before you came to New Zealand for a couple of days, you proved you were antigen-free before you left. And now, so the reality is that the aircrew are demonstrating on a daily basis that it's possible to create a channel back into New Zealand which can be expedited. At some stage, Lisa, there has to be some reward for vaccination. If we're going to become vaccinated, there's got to be some point to the exercise. And that point has to be liberty and freedom of movement. And there's ways of managing this. But unfortunately, we're trying to go for a one-size-fits-all approach at the moment, which really doesn't identify the low risk, low risk and high risk individuals. But in New Zealand, an aircrew clearly demonstrate to us that it's possible to do things differently.
Are all vaccinated travellers equal, Des? I mean, obviously Pfizer is the vaccine that New Zealand is rolling out. Other people who may eventually come to New Zealand may have had other vaccinations. Do we need a list of approved vaccines that we're happy to accept?
Yeah, I think if you look at something like Pfizer, which has a 93 to 95% success rate, you'd accept that at face value. Similarly with Moderna, whereas you look at things like AstraZeneca, which is only 60-odd%, or things like Janssen & Janssen, it's 60-odd%, then I'd say, well, that's great, you've been vaccinated, but I need you to have an antibody test to prove that you're actually immune. You think about, there are lots of vaccines we do that with. When we vaccinate someone for hepatitis B, we don't assume they're immune, we go and check their antibodies. So there are vaccines which have an incomplete response where we check them for antibody status. So what we'd do is we'd say, we'll accept Pfizer at face value, we'll accept Moderna at face value, but if you've had Janssen & Janssen or AstraZeneca, we need you to have an antibody test to prove that you actually have immunity. And that's something we do commonly. I think that test costs about $45.
So when does New Zealand need to start talking about what the plan is in terms of the border? in relation to vaccinations and the criteria that we have to meet for freedom of movement?
Look, I know that that's a question you're asking with great irony because the answer is a year ago. And you know that we should have, by now, this far into the pandemic, have an absolutely mature plan to open up our society and our economy. The fact that you even asked me the question means that, in fact, we, with all due respect, we are months and months and months behind that conversation occurring.
And that is Professor Des Gorman. Now, homai o whakaro, love your feedback on this one. MIQ, what should the arrangement be for fully vaccinated people? Should they still have to stay in a hotel for 14 days? The suggestion there that they could isolate at home for 2 or 3 days, have regular tests and checks on their location. What do you reckon? And what about travellers coming into the country? What vaccinations should we accept in order that they can travel here? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Kia ora, e te iwi e Haere nei I a Checkpoint. A warning from a recruiter, the slow vaccine rollout could lead to a super-sized brain drain. Hutt City residents on their rubbish new bins. And the group raising the roof and finding joy through song. Homai o whakaro, do get in touch about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. We'd love to hear your thoughts. A lot of you getting in touch about our story earlier around hysterectomies and at what age a woman should be left to decide for herself whether she wants one. Text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines now. Ko Susana anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. Young women say they are being denied hysterectomies by doctors who are prioritising fertility over the treatment of chronic endometriosis. The condition causes painful cramps and excessive bleeding, and in the most severe cases, removing the uterus is the last treatment option. But some young sufferers say doctors have denied them surgery because they are under 35 and it's assumed they will want children. The Fisheries Minister says an inquiry into the use of migrant labour will shed light on how the seafood industry can attract more New Zealanders. David Parker says the pandemic has exposed the reliance of deep-sea fishing on foreign workers, with hundreds of Russian and Ukrainian trawler crew recruited in the past year. The investigation will look at reducing the country's reliance on foreign workers in deep-sea and inshore fishing, aquaculture and seafood processing. The Office of the Children's Commissioner has released a report revealing self-harm, bullying and inappropriate use of force at an Oranga Tamariki residence in Lower Hutt. Yesterday it was announced that a Christchurch care and protection facility is closing after revelations of staff manhandling children. The Commissioner, Judge Andrew Beecroft, says the phased closure of such residences has been on the books for the last 6 or 7 years. The government has announced that the country's first Matariki public holiday will be on June the 24th next year. The dates for marking the Māori Lunar New Year have been set for the next 30 years. The Matariki holiday will always fall on a Friday, sometime between mid-June and early July. Rough sleepers are being trespassed from a council park in Whangārei despite growing alarm about homelessness in Te Tai Tokero. RNZ has this week revealed Whangarei's homeless population has shot up from 21 people to 293 in just 2 years. On Wednesday, 2 people living illegally in a park were trespassed by the Whangarei District Council with a warning they could be fined or imprisoned. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susana. No mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku manuhiri nai nei, ko Nicholas Poynton, who is in the studio with his business notes ready to go. Nicholas, so let's talk about off-the-plan apartments. So they're growing in popularity, are they?
I found this really, really interesting. This was a piece of research that was done by the real estate services company CBRE. And what they found that for the first time, off-the-plan apartments are actually cheaper than houses in Auckland. I didn't know that they had been more expensive for quite some time, but the reason why they've become cheaper is that prices for these types of properties have fallen more than 20% over the past 4 years to be about $860,000. At the same time, the price for a house in Auckland has increased by nearly 30% in the past year to be well over $1 million. And there's a couple of factors that are driving this. Off the plan plan apartments of about 2 bedrooms, they have really shrunken in size over the past 4 to 5 years. About in 2015 and 16, developers were finding it quite hard to sell these properties because they were so expensive because of their size. So they moved to reduce that to help increase the attractiveness to consumers. The other things that they've done, though, is that they've changed the way that the methodology for building these types of apartments. There's a real emphasis now on what's called walk-up apartments. These are apartment buildings that are less than 3 stories tall. When you get above that threshold, you have to start spending a lot of money on things like sprinklers and lifts, which increase the building costs for the developer, increases the price for the property, but also for the resident. Your body corporate fees are going to go up because those sorts of amenities need regular maintenance, regular checkups, those sorts of things. So these factors, in conjunction with house prices going up, has seen off-the-plan sales triple in the past 2 years, which is leading to more of these complexes being built. At the same time, fewer high-rise apartments are going up. And CBRE, they're touting this as a possible solution for first home buyers who feel locked out of the market. But you do have to take into account that these are different types of properties, maybe not aligned to the sort of dreams people have about their first house. They are going to be a lot smaller, usually 2 bedrooms, so compromises will probably have to be made.
Brace for price hikes, consumers. What's the deal with that?
That consumers are expecting them. So this is ANZ has released its consumer confidence survey. Comes out a couple of days after the business confidence survey. One of the key indicators from this survey has been that consumers, the proportion of people who think it's a good time to buy a major household item has increased over the past month. That's big things like washing machines, dishwashers, TVs, those sorts of things you don't buy on a regular basis. And this is less a sign of some, strength or confidence in the economy and more a degree of catch-up, because one of the problems we've seen in a lot of these consumer confidence surveys has been consumers saying one thing then doing another. A lot of consumers have been saying, no, we're quite shy about spending money at the moment. It's best to keep it in our back pocket. But then we get the electronic card spending data out, and it's quite clear that people have been spending a tremendous amount. They call it substitution, redirecting that money from maybe overseas travel into like local domestic goods, those sorts of things. But so we're seeing a bit of clarity there in the data. But the real thing that I want to talk about, and I sound like I'm hampering on about this, is inflation. It's not a particularly interesting subject on the surface, but it's a really important.
It is when you have to pay more for your bananas or your toilet paper or anything. It's in your back pocket.
And that's exactly how people should begin to think about this, because it's a prevailing theme in our economy. It's talked about in global markets at the moment. And in this survey, consumers' inflation expectations, that's what they think annual inflation will be, was above 5%. That's the highest reading that's ever been recorded in this survey. For context.
And way outside the reserve. Parameters for acceptable
context,
inflation.
the RBNZ, they have a target range of 2%, a maximum range of 3%. To be fair, consumers' inflation expectations do tend to be quite volatile. They do tend to be higher than what businesses think, and less credence is usually given to them. But they are important, and they're particularly relevant because earlier this week, businesses were saying 2/3 of them were expecting to pass on, some of the cost pressures they were feeling onto consumers, and it's a lot easier to raise prices when consumers are expecting it. And that's why inflation is so often a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Okay, let's look at the markets, Nicholas.
So the NZX is up 28 points to 12,684. The dollar is at 69.7 US cents and 93.3 Australian.
Oh, getting over enthusiastic there. Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business. A fast track to a COVID vax is one of the sweeteners luring in-demand New Zealand workers offshore, according to a leading local recruitment firm. Earlier this week, the Employers and Manufacturers Association told Checkpoint it was aware of an Aussie business offering a Kiwi worker 3 times their current salary. One recruitment company says it's a bloodbath of businesses poaching off each other, coupled with some international employers offering double the going rate and the enticement of offshore adventure. Consult Recruitment's Angela Cameron says there's a lot to like about Australia.
We are seeing increasing demand from Australia as employers over there are desperate, just like we are, to hire good talent. I guess the thing is with New Zealand is that we're generally paid a little bit lower than Australia. So for any Kiwi looking across the ditch, they're going to get paid more. They're going to enjoy some probably nicer, warmer weather. The sentiment that we're getting from a lot of candidates is, I think I might be able to get my jab quicker in Australia than I would in New Zealand. And so they're starting to do that now. And also there's just more opportunities over there. So I think, with younger candidates, there's just more opportunity than, to see a new place, to experience new things. I mean, Melbourne keeps on coming up. I asked my team this morning for examples of what's happening, and I heard Melbourne about 10 times. So that's running hot. And I know from my recruiter friends in Melbourne and in Sydney that they just can't find enough people. So, I mean, if I was an Australian recruiter, I would absolutely be targeting our talent pool, because we've got some amazing people in New Zealand and very talented and ambitious, but we are looking for talented, ambitious companies to work for as well, and there's good opportunities across the ditch.
So there's a sense of adventure attached to going to Australia, but the other thing that I just found really interesting there, Angela, is the vaccine. So people think they'll have more of a chance of getting the jab across the ditch.
Interesting, isn't it? We've heard that with the UK as well. I know of a few candidates who've decided to go to the UK. And I guess, if you are maybe in your mid-20s, there's a lot of uncertainty as to when you're going to be able to get the jab here. And so, pent-up demand and wanting to travel and thinking about adventure and maybe get the jab easier over there. So that is actually becoming a driver as well.
Can you give me some examples of the kind of money that you're seeing on offer in Australia compared to what we're offering here in New Zealand?
Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual to see 20, 30, 40% increases on what people are getting paid here. And I think the salary is absolutely part of it, but it feels like it's more about opportunity to be in a new environment and to, experience new things and actually just to travel. And for a lot of candidates, it's actually getting away from the environment here. A lot of them feel like the boy in the bubble who can't do anything. And so they just want to get out and explore. We are seeing a lot of counter offers and a lot of salary escalation in New Zealand as well. So Australia will pay more than us in general, but there's been some phenomenal counter offers just in New Zealand as well.
But people are still getting pipped at the post, with the Aussies coming back and offering yet more.
Probably 150 people have spoken with an Australian recruiter in the last week or two. So I would guesstimate that over the next couple of months we're going to see a mass exodus of people if this continues. We are seeing employers here respond, and we're seeing some pretty crazy salary escalation. We had a tech person a couple of weeks ago who was on $85,000 a year. We found her a long-term contract, New Zealand based, for $115 an hour, which is about a $200K salary. And when she went to resign, her boss just said, well, I'll just pay you that because I can't afford to lose you, So on an individual level, that is amazing, right? To go from 85 to effectively 200K. But if you're trying to run a business and trying to keep pay parity amongst your people, that's a little bit of a nightmare. When that first lockdown happened, there's organisations that send 100 tech contractors back offshore, and they haven't been able to get them back in again. So in terms of supply and demand, we are absolutely dire in terms of supply of good people, and companies just can't see a timeline or understand when this is going to change. Therefore, they are just having to pay whatever they can to retain their people.
So the tightly closed border is pushing up prices for companies.
Absolutely. We have seen salary escalation for probably the last 4 months, large escalation, 80K base, 50K counter-offer type of situations. And we can see that companies are really, really struggling to retain people. It's a bit of a bloodbath in specific areas. Top talent is really hard to find. Tech talent is really tough at the moment because we imported so much of our tech talent. There's so many large organisations that have decided to transform their tech. So there's lots of projects going on, and candidates talk as well. If you can get a $40,000 or $50,000 pay rise by going down the road, then you kind of can't blame them. But it's really hard to be an employer in this kind of situation.
Why can the Aussies afford to pay so much more?
It's just a bigger market, and I don't know, just more opportunity. I think, this is probably a personal thought, but I just believe that we have lost some of our aspiration as a nation, and our ability to kind of punch through. And a lot of people are tired. A lot of CEOs are tired. We're seeing a lot of turnover in CEOs at the moment due to exhaustion, and it's been 18 months of leading teams. And I just think for many it's just time for a change. We're talking a lot about the brain drain, but I'm worried it's going to become a brain deluge. So we have to take action, and we can't just sit back and think it's going to be fine, because I worry it's not.
And that was Angela Cameron. It is about 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. So much feedback coming in on a number of issues. Let's start with COVID, vaccinations and MIQ. This person says, I fully support reducing quarantine requirements for vaccinated travellers. At some point, we need to open our borders, and this is the way to do it. Another person says, business travel is not the same as aircrew. Aircrew are in isolation at their destination. Business people do not do that. Another says reality is that people will not stay at home to isolate. One listener says, how do we verify vaccine status of returnees? I have a card, but documentation is easily faked. And we're getting so much feedback on the issue of young women wanting access to hysterectomies when they're suffering from endometriosis. This person says, I can still remember being told the pain would go when I had children. I wasn't asked if I intended to have children, which I didn't. That was over 40 years ago. Things haven't changed. Sharon says those health professionals are completely misguided to block young women from having life-saving hysterectomies. I suffered from endometriosis for 30 years. A side effect of endo is that it can affect your fertility anyway. So the irony of being blocked in the hope that they can conceive is horrible. This is so Handmaid's Tale, says Sharon. Another one in from Jody. Jody says placing a woman's worth on her ability to reproduce is archaic, reductive and ignorant. I understand the need to prioritise other health issues. However, the way these young women have been treated is insulting. We all know if a man was experiencing what women go through, that tampons would have been free for years and hysterectomies would be at the drive-through. Grump over, says Jody. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. And Muriaki na Pitapita Kōrero after the news at 6. We'll speak to a women's health advocate on endometriosis, treatment and rights. Rough sleepers are being trespassed from a park in Whangarei despite growing alarm about homelessness in Northland. This week, RNZ revealed the homeless population in Whangarei, one of the country's housing crisis hotspots, has increased from 21 people to 293 in just 2 years. Today, we bring you the story of two people living for now in a park on the edge of the city. Sam Ollie reports.
Nobody said we get arrested. Hey, the news here.
This woman, who RNZ has agreed not to name, has been anxiously packing up her stuff for the last 2 days. She takes a break and shows me this week's trespass notice from the Whangarei District Council, warning her to stay off the park and the car park next to it. Otherwise, she could be fined up to $1,000 or imprisoned for up to 3 months if she returns within 2 years.
What did you think when you saw this?
Oh, gutted. So gutted.
She is worried she won't find somewhere else to park up as she waits for emergency housing.
Where can you go from here?
I don't know.
She has been living in the park with a male friend and their 2 dogs for nearly a year and says they're all friendly to passers-by. Whangarei care worker Bevan Bell often walks in the park and has spoken to the pair regularly. He wants to see them living somewhere warm, tidy and hygienic where they can keep their dogs. Mr Bell is cynical when he hears the government say it is working as hard as it can to rectify the housing shortage and homelessness in Whangarei.
What a joke. I know it's hard. We've had to live in the accommodation park. We were desperate for myself, my mate, another mate of mine and a couple. But I think, why have we spent how many millions of dollars on this monument thing down the town basin?
You mean the Hundavasta Centre?
Yeah, the Hundavasta. How many homes could have that built?
The Northland District Health Board's new report on homelessness this week said it was unlikely there is sufficient transitional housing in Northland to meet the need. It also said a very high proportion of homeless were Māori, and that was reinforcing and extending existing inequities. People sleeping rough in Whangarei are living in vehicles or around bridges and toilets. The report said for many Māori and others in Te Tai Tokiro, he kāinga ora is an unreachable dream. Liz Cassidy-Nelson heads the city's Open Arms Day Centre for the Homeless. She says the growing problem is very worrying.
We know in terms of housing deprivation, there's a real, housing vulnerability. There's a shame and a silence that comes with that for people. I don't want to tell people they haven't got a home.
Open Arms staff have been working with the couple in the park, getting them kai and access to showers, as well as housing support and social workers. When RNZ asked the Whangarei District Council about the trespass notice, they provided this statement.
We and several other agencies have been working with the campers for several months to help them find either a legal place to move their caravan and vehicle to or to find other accommodation. But none of the offers made have been taken up. This is a sports park and the car parks, toilets and changing rooms are intended for use by people involved in sports, who, along with neighbours, have expressed concern about this situation.
The council says a trespass notice is the final option when all others have been exhausted. If it fails, police are alerted.
Now to the group of people raising the roof on a humble community hall in West Auckland. Everybody Sings is a collection of people with one thing in common. They love to sing. And that's what they do every Thursday night. As well as the friendships they've made, members say it's also good for their mental health. Our reporter Louise Tanuth and cameraman Nick Monroe went along to choir practice.
In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight.
They say singing is good for the soul. That's on full display here in this community hall in West Auckland. A weekly get-together for these people of all ages with a shared love of carrying a tune.
I think a lot of people really long to sing, really want to sing. It's a very basic human expression. And I think lots of people have been told that singing's just for special people who have beautiful voices.
Kate Bell is the musical director of Everybody Sings. There are about 50 people here tonight for choir practice. It's a non-judgmental, fun, free get-together. No audition necessary. It's a diverse group, which is what makes it special.
Well, I think that's one of the exciting things about Everybody Sings, because I think, these days we socialise more and more with the people that we feel we're the same as, similar backgrounds, similar education. But in Everybody Sings, we have a massive cross-section of people. We have people from all kinds of educational backgrounds and walks of life. We have a huge age range. We have right from young people through to quite elderly people.
Darling, stand by me. Darling, stand by me. Darling, stand.
COVID-19 was the push many needed. The choir's numbers have swelled since the national lockdown. Pat Kohika's been coming along to the choir for 3 years. He admits it wasn't his idea to begin with.
And it was really my wife's idea. She came home one day and said, hey, I've seen this ad for a community choir, and I'm pretty sure she thought I wouldn't be interested. Do you want to do it? And I said, yeah.
The mental health benefits keep bringing him back each week.
it's singing is kind of like your happy place, really. It's the kind of thing that you do when it's a stressed out day, and we always look forward to Thursday nights when everybody sings together and it sounds great. I don't think there's a better feeling.
He's encouraging more men to get involved.
I've spoken to some of my friends and they just give me that kind of look. I don't know what it is or what they think it is, or what they're likely to they think they're going to discover when they come along to a choir. Maybe it's insecurities about whether they can sing or not, like everybody else, but for whatever reason, we have a real shortage of men. But I say to guys, it's the best thing you can do for your head. Get involved in it.
I won't cry, no I won't, I won't cry, no I won't, I won't, no I won't cry, no I won't.
It's mostly about the singing, but it's not all about the singing. Choir members have turned into choir friends for lots of people here. Jamie Connor says he's always been keen on singing and finally plucked up the courage to join the group.
Actually my sister was a singer when she was younger, and we used to sing around the house, and I always was a little bit jealous, so I thought I'd join in a little bit later.
He says the choir feels like the right place for him.
I went to singing lessons a couple of times, and it was a bit full on just doing one-on-one, and then but once you're in a choir, you can get on level with everybody else, and it just goes. Yeah, it's nice. It's really relaxing. I didn't appreciate it for that, but then I start to notice what's the time of the week when you can just switch off and just you just have a simple task which has no consequences and just sing. So yeah, it's quite peaceful.
Finding peace and happiness through song, which keeps them coming back for more.
Don't nobody know my troubles but God. Don't nobody know my troubles but God.
Good. That is so much better.
And if you were listening to that one on radio, we'll put Louise and Nick's piece up online so that you can watch the video on our Facebook page. A mountain of feedback on the issue of endometriosis, and particularly about women having authority and autonomy over their own bodies and making their own medical decisions. This listener says it's straight out control. My daughter is 20, a type 1 diabetic, and pregnant with her second baby. She has asked for her tubes to be tied, but she was turned down. Why? It's her body. Another person says, of course, young women should be able to choose. The pain is horrendous. Another listener has got in touch to say women are so tired of paternalism getting in the way of their self-care. Her body, her decision, end of. And this one saying, I'm devastated to learn that little has changed in the last 48 years since I had a tubal ligation after 5 pregnancies, including a baby stillborn with terrible deformity. The hospital would only go ahead with the surgery if my husband signed a permission paper. They asked, what if you want another child in future with a new husband? I said I wouldn't marry a person who could not understand why I had been sterilised. Come on, doctors, our bodies, our choice. Another one here, I feel like women should totally have the right to make those decisions about their bodies, and doctors should be supporting them in the process. Another person, though, Jeff, has got in touch to say surgeons need to absolutely cover themselves against all potential changes of mind in the future. Another here, young women are not getting treatment for endometriosis, even though it's debilitating. They are forced to wait for years. And another person says they've suffered chronic endometriosis undiagnosed for years, eventually found and paid for a specialist to perform a hysterectomy. Even as I was wheeled into surgery after anaesthetic, I heard one doctor questioning my operation. I was 34 and the mother of 1 child. My mother and grandmother had the same condition.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leata tēnei. A young woman says she was made to feel guilty about wanting a hysterectomy because her doctor thought she would want children. Grace Hall suffers from endometriosis, a condition which affects 1 in 10 women and causes painful cramps and excessive bleeding during periods. For the most severe cases, removing the uterus is the final treatment option. Ms. Hall told Checkpoint she made the decision at the age of 27, but her surgeon tried to stop her.
The clinical psychologist, he still tried to deny it and was just very determined that, I know, as a woman I have this, ability, responsibility to kind of reproduce.
Grace Hall says her surgeon's reluctance has affected her mental health. A medical expert believes there is a safe way that people who are fully vaccinated against COVID-19 can travel without risking an outbreak when they return. About 8% of the population has been vaccinated, but businesses are concerned they can't send staff overseas because of a lack of space in MIQ when they return. However, Professor of Medicine at Auckland University, Des Gorman, told Checkpoint aircrew already proved that there is a safe solution.
Aircrew who come back into the country who are fully vaccinated, they've been isolating for the couple of days while they're away, and they are quarantining or isolating at home, and there has not been a single outbreak resulting from that particular approach.
Professor Gorman also believes the government's vaccination targets are far too low. Australia will temporarily cut international arrivals by half as the country struggles to contain outbreaks of the COVID Delta strain. The temporary cap will help reduce pressure on quarantine facilities and will be in place until at least the start of next year. The Prime Minister Scott Morrison says at the same time the federal government will beef up commercial repatriation flights.
The Commonwealth will facilitate increased commercial flights to increase international repatriations during this period of reduced commercial caps at the major airports. So where we will lose some capacity for inbound flights, the Commonwealth will directly seek to mitigate that by upping those commercially facilitated flights.
The COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says there's no implication for the Trans-Tasman travel bubble based on today's announcement out of Australia. Whangārei rough sleepers are facing trespass notices amid a rapid rise in homelessness. This week, RNZ revealed new figures showing Whangarei's homeless population has increased from 21 people to 293 in just 2 years. Sam Ollie reports.
On Wednesday, 2 homeless people illegally living in a park were trespassed by the Whangārei District Council and warned they could be fined or imprisoned. The pair have been living in a car and a caravan and say they have nowhere else to go. The council says it has been working to help find them a legal place to live for several months, but offers have not been taken up. It says a trespass notice is the final option when all others have been exhausted. If it fails, police are alerted.
A military panel has found an Auckland sailor guilty of 3 sex attacks. The 27-year-old, who has interim name suppression, has denied sexual violation by unlawful sexual connection and 2 charges of indecent assault. The prosecution says the offences happened while the able rate was on a tour of duty in the Canadian city of Victoria last year. His court-martial at Devonport Naval Base has heard from 3 female colleagues who say he assaulted them in an apartment or taxi after they had been drinking. The panel is expected to reconvene tomorrow to consider the sentence. The Hutt City Council is combating conspiracy theories circulating around its new rubbish bins. The service, which launched yesterday, gives each household 3 new bins, each one equipped with a tag that links the bin to the house. But a small number of people have taken to social media speculating about the tags. One theory suggests they're being used by the council to monitor what each household is chucking in their bin. The Mayor Campbell Barry says it's all rubbish.
We've told it as it is. With that, it really is a way to be able to obviously identify a bin with a particular house, and it just makes sense. So, I mean, I'm not too concerned about that. I think anyone who uses some common sense when looking at those sorts of posts or misinformation being put out there will see it for what it is.
The final 3 household bins are expected to arrive on Sunday. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. 4 New Zealanders will ride in the toughest and most prestigious race on the Women's World Cycling calendar tonight, with one of them chasing overall glory. Michaela Harvey, Neve Fisher-Black, Georgia Williams and Michaela Drummond are competing at the Women's Giro d'Italia, which starts in northern Italy tonight. Harvey has been given the honour of leading her team after finishing 5th overall last year.
I'm really ambitious. For me, the pink jersey has been a dream of mine since I began cycling. So I'm always going to be courageous to try and race my heart out to get that.
The Women's Giro d'Italia runs for the next 10 days. Samoa's top weightlifters are devastated after the government banned them from competing at the Tokyo Olympics. 11 Samoan athletes have qualified for the Games, but only the weightlifters are Samoa-based, and the government has barred them from leaving the country because of COVID-19. Coach Jerry Wallwork says the lifters have been building up to the Olympics for the past 8 years.
Very disheartening. It's just devastating for the team, and it's just something I wouldn't want to wish on any athlete who's really put in everything.
A 3-strong New Zealand gymnastics team will compete at the Tokyo Olympics. Misha Kudanov will compete in the men's artistic competition, while Dylan Schmidt will compete in the men's trampoline. Maddie Davidson will become the first New Zealand women's gymnast to compete at the Olympics in the trampoline. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Sam Hunt selects the mixtape. Aradna's this week's Friday Night Live act. Country Life is mending fences in Canterbury, just one of the many clean-up jobs after the floods of late May. And because the first electric unit ran up the Johnsonville line on this day in 1938, we've got a sonic tonic dedicated to suburbia on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. In the west from Northland to Wellington, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Generally fine, areas of morning frost or fog. A few showers about eastern Northland and northern Coromandel. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waitatapa cloudy periods. The odd shower about northern Hawke's Bay and Gisborne. Mainly fine elsewhere with a few cloudy areas. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Fine and frosty, patches of low cloud or fog morning and night. Bulla and Westland mostly fine, some areas of cloud. Fiordland mostly cloudy, patchy drizzle about the coast, and Chatham Islands cloudy periods and the odd shower. RNZ National, it's 6:07
Kia ora rā, Susana. No mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Left in pain as doctors prioritise fertility over patients' needs. That's what young women suffering chronic endometriosis say is happening to them. The condition affects 1 in 10 women and causes painful cramps and excessive bleeding during periods. Tonight, 2 women shared their struggles to access hysterectomies with Checkpoint. One was made to feel extreme guilt, her surgeon telling her that she had a responsibility to reproduce. And a 19-year-old girl says she's been told to wait 16 years, get married and have 2 kids before she can get one. So how much autonomy do women have over their bodies in 2021? Dr. Orna McGinn is a GP and women's health advocate, and she joins me now. Kia ora, Doctor.
Kia ora, Lisa.
So tell us, who gets to decide here? Whose choice should it be?
Well, all medical decision-making really should be done in partnership. So what we aim to do as doctors really is hear the patient's story, give them the best advice, but ultimately decisions are theirs as long as they are fully informed and capable of consenting to treatment. I mean, really gone are the days where people are told what to do.
It seems so in the cases that we've heard from and the enormous amount of feedback we've got on this particular story that women are feeling marginalised, ignored and treated like children who don't know their own minds when it comes to making some of these decisions. So have things really changed that much?
Without obviously being able to comment on particular things, I think one of the issues around women's health in general and endometriosis in particular is that women do find it really difficult to often access care. I mean, sometimes people will have gone through extreme pain for several years before they do get to see a specialist or are offered definitive surgery, because we know that women often are told that painful periods are a normal feature of being a woman, for instance, which obviously is not true or shouldn't be true. So I know that there are a lot of women out there who feel that they're not being listened to, and there's a real shame. Endometriosis can be profoundly disabling for women. It can be extremely debilitating, leading to time off work and infertility issues, as women have described to you, and poor functioning. And really, if surgery is required, to the best of my knowledge, it's always offered. But I think sometimes it is difficult for women to navigate to specialists, and the kind of highly specialised surgery that sometimes is needed for severe endometriosis is not available everywhere. But women may not be able to find out which services are available in their area, or whether they need to travel out of the area to see someone who is specialised in that kind of difficult surgery, which sometimes can involve resecting bowel, for instance, or very long operations that take 4 or 5 hours.
What about the assumption that these women will want to have children? Because that seems to be another experience of people requesting treatment, specifically hysterectomies, that their decision that they won't want children is being challenged.
Again, I think, unfortunately, this is quite a common thing that women do come up against. We find the same thing when women are requesting tubal ligation, for instance, having their tubes tied, that they're often, put off by told that they're too young, or they've only had one child, or they've not had any children. So there are a lot of issues around women not having quite enough control of their fertility. So it's disappointing if women don't get the treatment that they feel they need, and I would like to think that they would be able to find, a highly experienced obs-and-gynae specialist who would be able to listen to them and share in their decision making, because it's something like a hysterectomy is drastic, but for some women with severe endometriosis, if medical management has failed and they are suffering and they cannot continue their life, then sometimes that is the only option.
So what should they do if they're in a situation where this is one of the treatments available to them, but they're getting this kind of pushback from the medical person who's advising them? What are the options? What do you do? Shop around until you find someone who agrees with you?
Well, I think what I would advise women to do is to seek out advice from specialist organisations like, for instance, Endometriosis NZ. That's a very excellent support network here in New Zealand, and they often can provide coaching and mentoring services for women who are suffering. The other thing about endometriosis is that it is very complex, and often you need a multidisciplinary approach. You need to have an understanding of GP. Sometimes you need the input from psychology and pain specialists, as well as surgeons. So it's always important that women have had all the input they require, multimodality input really, before making the decision to have surgery which will impact on their fertility. But if they are fully informed and that is the only option, then that is their prerogative, and they should be allowed to choose that.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is Dr. Orna McGinn, who is a GP and also a women's health advocate. A community housing group says a Samoan family of 15 living in a 4-bedroom house has been let down by kāinga order. The Associate Minister of Health with responsibility for Pacifica has given budget funding to community providers, but they say it's not enough. RNZ Pacific's Marina Whangārei Muller has the story.
Haere mai ki te capital o Manukau. Our Pizzo William Seal welcomed into Otara this morning by a Cook Islands turo. He was here to talk to South Auckland community elders about the government's $41 million budget injection into community housing, specifically the Healthy Homes initiative brought in by the Ministry of Health to prevent rheumatic fever created by cold and damp conditions, something that's desperately needed. Half of all Pacifica live in Māori freezing homes, according to Stats NZ, which explains why Pacifica also have the highest incidences of rheumatic fever in the country. In the capital of Manukau, horror stories of just that.
There are 2-level houses right now with no bedrooms on the bottom floor, and no showers and no toilets on the bottom floor. So our Pacific elders are having to shower outside. That was happening for 10 years because there was a lack of understanding of Pacific ways of living and Pacific ways of being.
In 2016, Tuputau Lelaulu founded Mau Studio, an architectural design firm putting Indigenous lifestyles at the fore. He wants the way homes are built to change. 2 3-bedroom homes for ainga, kainga, whānau who live intergenerationally aren't cutting it. He says officials must engage with Pacific architects and designers in the creation of homes that reflect Pacific values.
That mana enhancing process for Pacific communities into housing here in New Zealand really starts with the design process. Like, that's not done at the moment. The last time a Pacific Design Guide was created was back in 2002, and really only maybe 6 to 7 houses were built off that design guideline. Really, housing is not fit for purpose for Pacific communities because it's not integrated into the design process and the construction process of housing in New Zealand.
Rachel Brown heads up service delivery at the National Hauora Coalition, which runs Auckland-wide healthy homes. They stumbled across a Samoan family of 15 crammed into a 4-bedroom, 1-bathroom home. Mum contracts rheumatic fever, then 2 of her daughters, and then Mum's taken to hospital to remove 2 of her heart valves. Several government agencies attempted to alleviate the situation, but the community housing provider says Kainga Ora deemed the issue too hard.
And to be honest, sometimes housing is not the primary need. They want to put food on the table. They need shoes for their kids to go to school. They need warm clothing. And sometimes the housing need comes secondary to whatever is the primary need at the moment.
Kainga Ora has been approached for comment. Dr Brown says the expansion of the Healthy Homes Initiative shows a serious effort on the government's part to curb the crisis.
I definitely think the way we build houses needs to change, but the most important thing is getting the whānau input into this. Not just a government initiative that thinks they know what whānau want, but actually taking whānau through a co-design process around housing and building in order to meet their needs. So sometimes it's not about how many bedrooms, it's about the spaces we live in.
Benina Health Trust was registered as the first Pasifika community housing provider in 2017. Today, they are in contact with more than 500 families, operating about 136 units in Auckland alone. Having grown up in state housing and now helping those who live in the same struggle, Benina CEO Tupuola Roine Leala Iauloto cries for some sort of solution.
We just can't keep up with the demand. You know, we're talking about demand with increased population. In terms of COVID, that's exacerbated by the fact that a lot of people came home. You know, the prices of rentals is phenomenal. You know, the price of housing, the market is red hot.
She says there needs to be alternative solutions to housing that leverage Pasifika needs and values. Pasifika, who come out worst in almost every housing measure, no simple fix.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some of the country's biggest tourism minds have been tackling the issues around access to the sights and sounds of New Zealand. They say disadvantaged people are unable to explore their own backyard because it isn't affordable or accessible enough. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton is in Queenstown.
The Tourism Future Task Force was saddled with the job of finding a new direction for the industry, but after releasing its interim report, it was shut down by the Minister, who has plans of his own. However, Tourism Industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Chris Roberts says the reports clearly made an impression.
But this particular recommendation is something I've never seen explicitly stated before. How do we ensure that all New Zealanders have an opportunity to enjoy the wonders of tourism in their own country with all the social, environmental, economic and cultural benefits that come with that? And if we are to provide that opportunity to all Kiwis, what role can individual tourism businesses or a destination play?
The task force recommendation urged the government and the industry to develop better ways to make tourism more accessible and affordable. That could include government incentives, off-season capacity and reduce rates to low socio-economic groups. Chris Roberts says businesses across the country are already using different pricing and tools.
There is no one-fit-all approach here. As examples, dynamic pricing, differential pricing, these are both options, but they're not going to be suitable in all cases. However, the value placed on a product can vary between consumer segments and can be priced differently. There may be some cases where Kiwis can be offered a discount or international guests pay more.
He used the example of Doc's Great Walks, which has two prices, one for Kiwis and another for overseas visitors. But he doesn't believe that should be embraced everywhere.
Queenstown Lakes should not be discounting itself. It doesn't need to. Because a characteristic of New Zealand, where our tourism product is based on landscapes, is we have so many free things to do in this country. Now that means we don't always get money out of the wallets of our overseas visitors who would be quite prepared to pay. But on the positive side, virtually every family in New Zealand can actually afford to have a holiday break.
Skyline Queenstown was packed today with tourism leaders for a business lunch hosted by Destination Queenstown and the local Chamber of Commerce. DOC Director General Lou Sanson says it's all about finding the right balance.
These are your lands, and access to these conservation areas for visitors is the very core of what we do as an agency, and it is about accessibility and inclusivity. And we need to balance that environmental protection against cost recovery, about how we disperse visitors, and a range of prices, as Chris said, with the new camp pass we just released, that suit every budget for New Zealanders and our international visitors.
Air New Zealand Chief Customer and Sales Officer Whangārei says her industry is facing different cost changes.
There's discussions around IBL departure taxes. We see increased fees coming through from some of our airports because airport pricing is a volume game, and when you don't have so many passengers, prices go up. So we're constantly evaluating and talking to core stakeholders around that, just to make sure that we are able to ensure travel fares are remaining at a place where they are accessible.
Over the past 12 months, she says 39% of all domestic airfares, roughly 3.9 million fares, were sold for under $100.
Manawa mai te putanga o Matariki. Today is the first day of Matariki, the Māori lunar year. Across the country, people gathered at dawn around fires on hilltops and on beaches to catch a glimpse of the glittering cluster. And it's hoped there'll be more next year when Matariki becomes an official public holiday. Jamie Tahana and cameraman Sam Rilstone were at the dawn ceremony at Te Papa.
The karakia carried across the glassy harbour on an unusually still Wellington morning. A lament for those who've died in the past year and wishes for the year ahead. The Umu Kohu Kohu Whetu burned as the 9 stars of Matariki started twinkling in the northeast sky, the first time they've been seen in over a month. Astronomer Rangi Matamua is one of the foremost experts on Matariki, but he was worried for a bit.
And that's usually how it is at that hour, but then as soon as the karakia started, you saw that the cloud lifted and Matariki came through quite well at the end.
To Māori, Matariki is timed to the rise of the cluster also known as Pleiades, and of the Tangaroa phase of the moon, bringing the old lunar year to an end and heralding the time to plant new crops. Ka puta Matariki karere whānui, ko te tohu tēnā o te taue. And traditionally, celebration ensues. It's time to remember those who've died in the year just gone, to be with those still around, and to cast wishes for the year ahead. The brightness of the particular stars of the cluster also taken as signals of what's to come.
It wasn't as clear as it was last year. It wasn't as spread as apart as it was last year. So I think my read is it might be a little bit of a leaner year this year. It's still probably going to be very warm, but I don't know if it would be as productive perhaps as it was last year. That was my personal read anyway.
And from next year, Matariki will be an official public holiday, always falling on a Friday, sometime between mid-June and early July. Workplace Relations Minister Michael Wood says it's important the country finally have a holiday embedded in te ao Māori.
We've also had parts of the business community who have come forward and said that they will really welcome this. So, for example, tourism and hospitality have said that another long weekend in the middle of the year when things can be a bit quiet will actually be really good for them. And when we've done the economic modelling, it shows that actually probably, there'll be some unders and some overs, but probably at an overall level, there's not going to be a particularly significant cost to our economy.
He insists it's worth it, and despite concern from some sectors, the country can afford it.
When I was a kid growing up in the 1980s, We didn't know what Matariki was. It wasn't spoken about or even understood in many parts of New Zealand. Now there's increasingly an appetite for it. So I really do think it is something that can bring Māori, Pākehā and other communities together. We are celebrating something that is uniquely Māori and uniquely New Zealand here.
Next year, the public holiday will be on June the 24th. So how does Rangi Matamua reckon we celebrate?
It's a period of festivities, of feasting, of celebration, of spending time together. For me, I think just dedicated time with your family and friends, eating, sleeping, having fun, and planning for the new season. I hope those values underpin our modern day practice of Matariki.
Matariki ki tua o ngā whetū. Matariki of endless possibilities.
Conspiracy theories, theft and mixed messaging. The rollout of Hutt City Council's new rubbish collection service has certainly hit a few bumps. It was meant to be fully operational yesterday, but some residents are trashing the service already. The Mayor says the problems are par for the course for a change in service as huge as this one. Harry Locke reports.
It's all changed for Hutt City residents when it comes to where they put their rubbish. The brand new service means brand new bins for every house. The Mayor Campbell Barry says it's the biggest undertaking in decades.
No doubt about that, the size of it. We're interacting with every household every week. It is a big change, and it's one that is, in my view, absolutely necessary for us to catch up with a lot of other areas and to do the right thing by our environment and to ensure everyone's got access to an affordable bin as well.
But 2 days into the new regime, a few thousand households still don't have a bin to put their bags into. 3,000 bins are currently sitting on a boat in the Tasman, their delivery having been delayed. Hopefully they'll arrive on Sunday, but it's making residents very grouchy. One resident whose words have been revoiced says she has no idea when her bin will get here.
I still have no bins and I haven't been able to get any information about when I can expect to receive them. Emails have not been answered. I tried contacting the local councillor but have had no response yet.
Your call is unable to proceed at this time. Please try again later.
And she still hasn't been getting much help from phone operators.
When I can get through, I've been told they're not on the track for delivery yesterday, and I was promised a call back, which doesn't happen. And trying to call them hardly works, as the line says your call is unable to proceed at this time. Please try again.
There are also further problems being reported on social media. Reports of bins going missing and being stolen. One could say it's a certain type of espionage. Campbell Barry says teething issues were always going to happen, with a change so significant as this one. Meanwhile, a slightly stranger conversation is also underway, centring around the little discs fastened underneath each bin. These RFIDs link each bin to a property. But a small number of people have taken to social media with various conspiracy theories. One theory suggests they're being used by the council to monitor what each household is chucking in their bin, and that if it's the wrong item in the wrong bin, they'll be fined. The Mayor says that's rubbish.
We've told it as it is. With that, it really is a way to be able to obviously identify a bin with a particular house, and it just makes sense. So, I'm not too concerned about that. I think anyone who uses some common sense when looking at those sorts of posts or misinformation being put out there will see it for what it is.
The problems don't end there. On Facebook, one Wainui Mata resident has a calendar showing this week is the blue bin, but her neighbours shows this week is the yellow bin. The arrival of waste management means for the old companies who used to do the rubbish collection, they're now out of a job. Al's Litter Bins owner, Emma Gregory, says the council's move came as a complete shock. The profitable family business was suddenly worth nothing. They submitted a joint tender with their erstwhile competitor Low Cost Bins for the council contract.
We went to every hearing, we submitted, we did everything that we possibly could to be sort of heard, to say what that meant for our business, but, well, here we are, no longer in business.
The Hutt City Council hopes by the end of next week, all the bins will be in their rightful place.
And a lot of feedback from you this evening. Before we go, this from a person who says, I'm 48 years old. I've had endo since I was 20, if not earlier. But it took till my 30s to be finally diagnosed. I've had 3 operations to move it. Each one created more scarring and adhesions than the last. I pleaded for a hysterectomy but was refused, as I may change my mind and want children. I never wanted them though. I still don't have them. So at 48, I'm still suffering with unwanted endometriosis. Check out lately. They're here from 10.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A young woman with endometriosis has told Checkpoint her surgeon tried to stop her having a hysterectomy because she might want to have children. Auckland University's Des Gorman says aircrew have proven that there is a safe way for vaccinated people to travel without risking an outbreak on their return. A military panel has found a 27-year-old Auckland sailor guilty of 3 sex attacks in the Canadian